I was on Reddit the other day and came across a discussion that just left me cold. I was on one of those Ask Me Anything subreddits, and where they take different people, people that have written books or done interesting things with their life, and they open themselves up for questions. People on Reddit can ask them anything. And so anyway, this guy says, hey, I've been living for the last 10 years as Hikikomori, ask me anything. Well, I'd never heard of the word Hikikomori. In fact, I have no idea if I'm even pronouncing it correctly right now. So I looked it up, and it's this phenomenon that's happening in Japan. It's spreading all over their country, where over 700,000 people now, mostly young males, have identified as living as Hikikomori, which means basically it's a modern age hermit. They cut themselves off from society. They withdraw. The guy on this subreddit said that he had lived in his room for the last 10 years, hardly ever going out. He said he left once every 2 months to go get a haircut, and that was about it. And so he opened himself up for questions, and I was just fascinated with this whole discussion. And the one question he got was, well, do you get bored? I mean, if you've been stuck in your room for 10 years, do you ever get bored? And his response, like I said, it just left me cold. Here's what he said. He said, for me, being Hikikomori feels like you are always half drowning. Nowhere in the ocean you have to keep treading water. You are trying to reach that island in the distance, but it's really hard to tell how far you have been reaching. And you can't tell whether that island is just a mirage or not. So yeah, you don't really have time to feel bored. There's a great danger of burnout instead. As I read that, like I said, I had to read it again because it was just so stunning. And I realized I have felt this way before. As I've dealt with anxiety and dealt with different things, that's exactly how it feels. And I realized there's an awful lot of you that may be feeling exactly the same way. In fact, if the stats are right, a huge portion of you feels this way more than you'd like to admit. And here's the crazy thing that happens. When we start to feel anxious, or when we start to feel depression or fear or anger or whatever it is, and it's often tempting to just stuff it. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about it with other people for a whole bunch of different reasons. Maybe we don't want to burden other people, or maybe going through the whole thing is more painful than just getting through the rest of the day. Or maybe we're worried about what people will think of us, and we think we're the only ones dealing with it, and if we talk about it, then they're going to realize just how much of a freak of nature we really are, and so we just keep stuffing it down. And as we stuff it down, we start to feel ashamed. And as we feel ashamed, we stuff it even more, and it just builds this nasty, awful cycle that drives us into isolation. While we may leave our houses emotionally, we're like this guy. We're like Hikikomori. We've blocked ourselves off. We don't let people inside. Well, odds are if you're watching this video, you're in a group. You're either in a student group or a home group. There's a group of you sitting down to watch this video. And that group right now that you're with can be a tremendous tool as we are dealing with our emotional health, as we're dealing with anxiety or depression or fear or anger. It can be an incredible tool to help us deal with our shame. The Bible in Galatians 6:2 says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. In Hebrews 10:25 and 26, it says, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. I'm going to ask us to do some pretty difficult things with our group time today. I'm going to ask us to look at shame directly in the face. I'm going to ask us to take the things that have been going on between our ears and bring them out into the open. I'm going to ask the Hikikomori to come outside. There's a few things that we're going to do with our time today. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to sit in silence. There's nothing magical about this silence, but we're just going to set a timer for about 5 minutes, and just sit there. Because guess what? As we're getting ready to do this, as we're getting ready to talk through what goes on in our heads, as we're getting ready to deal with shame, fear, anger, depression, you name it, it takes a little bit of time just to think about what you want to even say. How do you take this thing that you've been grappling with and bring it to everyone else? So we're going to give you that space and we're going to give you that time to think. It also gives you a couple minutes just to work up the courage, because I know this isn't easy. I know, I've done it. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to have a time to share. If you're not ready, this is a time that has no pressure. It's okay to take a pass. It's okay to say, I'm not quite there yet. But this is also an opportunity, if you want to take the time right now to talk in front of a safe group, in front of a group of people that love you, and say, hey, this is what's going on. Now, if someone in your group shares, I want you to respect them by doing a couple things for me. Number one, listen. Actually listen to their words. Don't be thinking about what your response will be. Don't be thinking about what you want to say next. Think about what they are saying. Feel what they're feeling. They're opening the door. Walk through it and sit in their mental living room with them for just a little bit so that you can experience their world through their eyes. It's okay if after somebody shares, the room is silent for a little bit. Everybody's been listening. That's a good thing. Also, don't give quick advice. Don't just say, oh, I had that once and here's how I handled it. That's not what this time is for. Instead, this is a time for you to just learn about somebody else. And then if and when you do respond, make sure to let them know that number one, you love them. Number two, that you're praying for them and that you're rooting for them, that you're on their team, that you accept them just the way they are. And then the last thing we're going to do is I've given your leaders an activity. There's a set of scriptures. Each one of you is going to take one, and you're going to answer the question, what does this verse say about me? Because here's the deal. I know what Jonathan says about Jonathan. I know what I say about me, and it's not a good tape to listen to. It's an ugly one. There's an awful lot of things that I say about myself or that I believe about myself that number one, aren't true, and number two, just create more shame and anxiety. But when I look at what the Bible says about me, when I look at what Jesus thinks about me, it makes it a lot harder. It makes that anxiety different. It makes that depression a lot tougher to stick around with, because I realize, wow, this is what Jesus says about me? And I want you to plunge into that with your group. I want you to find out those things together as a group. Today, in this session, this group is not a cure-all. It's not a, hey, you've been dealing with depression, so after today it's going to be all over. No, today is just a step. Today is your first step of many as you journey towards Christ, towards a healthy self-identity, towards a life that is free of shame, a life where you no longer have to hide. I invite you to sit with your group right now and take that first step.